to the call.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elvira Kulieva, and I will moderate today's talk. I welcome you all and remind you that the presentation today is a part of online Glow series, Conversations on Quran Translation. Our esteemed presenter today is Dr. Emi Goto, who is an assistant professor at the Research Institute for Languages and Cultures of Asia and Africa at the Tokyo University of Foreign Studies, Japan. Her research interests include the intellectual history of Islam, Quranic studies, and women and gender. Her English language publications include Inscribing God's Words in Japan, Connecting the Past to the Present through the translations of the Qur'an in the Inscribing Knowledge and Power in Muslim Societies, that was published in 2023, and A Turn to Hermeneutics, Nasser Hamid Abu Zaid's Rethinking of Religion and Tradition in Japan, in the book published in 2023, that is called Beyond Modernity, Critical Perspective on Islam, Tradition and Power. The today talk is going to be very intriguing, and the title is Between Empathy and Objectivity, Reading the Quran in Japan. Before giving the online floor to our esteemed speaker, I just want to remind you that we will have around 40 minutes of presentation, and then we will have time for our discussion, and you would be able to ask your questions, comments, at your comments, and share your thoughts on the talk. So Dr. Emi, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your introduction, Elvira. I am truly honored to join the global conversation on the Quran translation. And today I will talk about a case from Japan. You might know Japan is a country with a small Muslim population. And although there is no reliable census of religious affiliation, it is estimated that less than 0.02% of the total population is Muslim. That is like one of the smallest, I think, number that you may find in the world. And yet it might surprise you, over a dozen complete translations of the Quran have been published since 1920. And it was about 3 years ago that I gave a talk on the brief history of Japanese translations in the Global lecture series. And I mentioned that the earlier translations were done by non-Muslims who were interested in Islam with a kind of empathy and academic objectivity, while the later translation were done by Muslims of various backgrounds. And I also compared the translation of Toshihiko Izutsu, a non-Muslim scholar, and Ryo Ichibita, who converted to Islam from Buddhism and became the second president of the Japan Muslim Association. Some of you might have attended and asked me some good questions. And I also mentioned that by translating the Quran, Izutsu referred to the tafsir of al-Baydawi and the European scholarship of Arabic studies. He positioned the Quran as a historical document and hoped to describe the moment of revelation through his Japanese translation. And Mita, on the other hand, the Muslim scholar, related the Quran to his own life and that of his fellow Muslims, seeing it as the eternal words of Allah addressed to people of all ages. And for me, as a researcher on modern Islam, contemporary Islam, Mita's translation is more appropriate for understanding contemporary Islam and Muslims. However, because Izutsu's version was published as one of the most widely distributed paperback series by one of the major publisher in Japan, that is Iwanami Shoten, it has circulated more widely and has been continuously reprinted, sold, and distributed to the academic institutions and the public libraries and maybe private houses. In other words, we can say Izutsu's translation holds a firm place as a classic Quranic translation for non-Muslim readers in Japan. So today, I'm going to talk about some of the background of the translation of Izutsu. And as you know, maybe you know better than me, probably, but he is a well-known scholar of Islamic studies, author of such works as The Structure of Ethical Terms in the Qur'an, God and Man in the Qur'an, and Ethical Religious Concept in the Qur'an. In order to discover the original meanings of the terms and concepts in the Qur'an, Izutsu used his extensive knowledge of linguistics and philosophy. And although he was not a Muslim, his empathy for Islam was, one might say, evident. What I would like to do today is, first, to relate his empathy to the religious environment in Japan, and second, to show how he has shown the way to approach the Quran to the general readers who are not Muslims, like general Japanese readers. And in the end, I hope my presentation will give you some idea of Izutsu's contribution to the Japanese translation of the Quran. And let me begin with a brief explanation of the religious environment in Japan. Japan is a home to a diverse mix of religious culture, including Shintoism, Buddhism, Christianity, and others. This table 1 shows how the numbers of adherents to major religions has changed by decades from 1960 to 2020. And this is according to the statistical survey on religion conducted by the Agency for Cultural Affairs. It is a public institution. For this survey, a questionnaire was sent to each Japanese religious group, asking them to provide information on how many followers they had, according to their own estimates. So this is according to their own estimates is something important too. And you may have noticed that the total number of adherents to each religion, some of the adherents to each religion is much larger than the total population of Japan. The last line is the total population of Japan, but the first line is a much larger numbers. This is because one person may be counted in several categories, including cases where the same person is a financial supporter of a temple, Shinto parishioners, and sometimes a follower of another religion. And according to the survey data, the majority of Japanese population adhere to Shintoism or Buddhism. But according to another survey, this one, conducted during the same period, approximately 70% of Japanese respondents answered negatively to the question, do you have any faith or belief? And they said they did not have any faith, did not believe in anything, or were not particularly interested in believing something. Maybe it surprised you, but this situation in which people belong to or are involved in the practice of more than one religion, but they say they have no faith or belief in a particular religion. It's sometimes referred to as Japanese non-religiousness. But in contrast, when asked in the same survey whether they believed in the other world, approximately 20% said yes, 20% said they could not decide, and 30% they did not believe. So many people kind of believe in the other world. And I had a party, I had a conversation with my colleague two weeks ago at a party, and I asked them that, what would you like to be in the other world? So in the other world mean that you are born again to the human being, and you can be someone else. so this kind of conversation, can be like a normal for the Japanese people. And also, here is another important question. When they are asked, whatever your relationship with religion, do you think it is important to have a religious spirit? Approximately 70% of those surveyed stated that this was important, that is, the religious spirit is important. Considering these responses and the result of other surveys on popular beliefs, religious scholar Ryosuke Okamoto wrote, "For many Japanese, religion is not something they believe in, but something important to them. When asked if they have faith, they deny it. And when it comes to the vague term, the religious mind or the religious spirit, they consider it a positive thing. And religion is emphasized as a practice related to mood and emotions." That is his word. Now, let me share with you an observation, a quite interesting observation about the religious environment of Japan, made by a famous scholar of the Quranic studies, Nasr Hamid Abu Zaid, an Egyptian scholar. He lived in Japan for 4 years in the second half of the 1980s. He was a visiting professor of Arabic at Osaka University of Foreign Studies, and he explains, in traditional Japanese houses, there is a private room with a miniature model of Shinto shrine or Buddhist temple. This is also miniature Buddhist temple, or both. When celebrating New Year's Eve, all Japanese, including Buddhists, go to Shinto shrines. And also, he didn't mention here, but he mentioned in another place that they are celebrating Christmas too. And in the celebration of the dead, a Buddhist feast during the summer, all Japanese go to their family head to offer gifts and prayers to the lives of their dead ancestor, including the Christian Japanese. And even more, a Japanese who may marry in the Shinto style and hold a funeral in the Buddhist way. So the religion is in the life of people in the house also. And by looking at the cases, Abu Zaid claimed that one should not be deceived when they ask Japanese people about their religion. Their answers will be that they do not believe in any religion, they will say. But he interpreted that the meaning of this answer is that they do not confine themselves to a particular religion or religious practice, but choose from each religion what is appropriate in a particular moment. That is his observation. And Abu Zaid further said that if one takes religion as a pattern of belief or perception that defines the status of man in the universe and determine his relationship with nature and other human beings, then the Japanese society is a society of religiosity and even deep faith. So for Abu Zaid, the concept of religion for many Japanese was close to the Sufi perception of unity of existence, Wahdat al-Wujud. Only the metaphysical principle is absent from it. Now we go to the Izutsu story. And you can find this kind of religious mixture in the life of Toshihiko Izutsu. Under the influence of his father, Izutsu became familiar with Zen at an early age. And at the age of 13, he enrolled in Aoyama Gakuin Junior High School, which was founded by the American Methodist Episcopal Church. And there, he had to join the prayer time every morning for like 1 hour. And at first, he didn't like it at all. But one time, he wrote later that he was so he felt sick about praying because he didn't believe in the God. But one time he was feeling very bad, and he slowed out like his breakfast, and then after that he felt so nice and very clear, and after that he appreciated the prayer time and he enjoyed it, and he was interested in the religion, Christianity, and also other religion too that he wrote. But anyway, at the age of 17, he enrolled at Keio University, one of the most prestigious private universities in Japan. And it was founded by Yukichi Fukuzawa, a Confucian-influenced modern Japanese intellectual. And upon graduation from the university at the age of 23, he became a research assistant at the Faculty of Literature. And during this period, after the graduation, Izutsu began learning Arabic and Islam. He later recalled that his interest in monotheism led to his interest in Islam. So his original experience with Christianity and made him interested in Islam as well. And his mentor was Abdul Rashid Ibrahim, a Tatar activist who was staying in Japan. And he also met Musa Jalalullah, a Tatar scholar, and went to his house daily to devote himself for the studies. This continued until the World War II, when Jalalullah left Japan. And around the same time, Izutsu began to work for the East Asiatic Economic Investigation Bureau of the Manchurian Railway and began contributing articles to several academic journals. It was perhaps during this period that Izutsu developed a strong interest in the Prophet Muhammad. He published a biography of the Prophet titled Muhammad in 1952. In its introduction, Izutsu wrote, "Muhammad is an extraordinary figure who once had a spell on the blood of my youth." Kind of strong word. "I spent one of the most spectacular periods of my life with him. His image followed me everywhere and never left me for a moment. First, it was forced upon me by the circumstances of my life. From the time I woke up in the morning until I went to bed at night, I read Arabic, spoke Arabic, taught Arabic, and pored over old Arabic poetry book and the Qur'an at my desk. As I look back on those dreamy days, why would I have the time to forget Muhammad?" So Izutsu's interest in the Prophet Muhammad was also evident in the commentaries accompanied each volume of his translation of the Quran, published between 1957 and 64. The commentary referred to the style of the Quran, the history of how it was created and developed, and also the life of Muhammad. It stated that it is only by linking the story of Muhammad's life to the Quranic phrases and by further exploring its spiritual historical significance that the reasons for the rapid and powerful expansion of Islam into a world religion can be understood. That is his statement. As I said at the beginning of the talk, but he suggested that readers read the translation of the Quran as a human document of Muhammad, a powerful figure in the history of the East. Although he admits that it is not possible to present his life in the brief commentary. So he wrote, "My ultimate wish while translating this sacred text called the Quran in the colloquial style," his was colloquial style translation too, "before anything else, was to present it as a living human document for general readers. Rather than approaching the scripture from the front with their hideous armor, I wanted to approach them from the back door as a record of Muhammad's life in this world, from the perspectives of his humanness." So he connected the life of Muhammad and the presence of Muhammad to the contents of the Quran quite firmly too. But he also wrote, "Of course, the Quran is for 300 million believers around the world, the absolute truth, the words of God, and the most sacred text of all scriptures. For the non-believers, this sacred text is a precious document from the ancient East. This may be valuable as a unique human document that arouses interest and empathy in our hearts." So his readers are majority Japanese non-Muslims. So that is why he wrote it in the introduction of the translation of the Quran. And according to Izutsu, there were two ways for non-believers to read the Quran with interest and empathy. First, to see it as a kind of monologue in which God speaks directly to Muhammad and expressing this in spoken Japanese. So that is why Izutsu tried to make his translation colloquial. The second is to approach the Quran with a good peripheral knowledge of when the revelation was given and shared. He refrained from doing so in the translator's commentary because of space limitation. He wanted to do it, but he couldn't do for the limited space of limitation, limited space for the translation of the Quran. That is 3 volumes, as you see. Each has some commentary or explanation of some of the history and terms, but he couldn't make like a detailed knowledge in it. But he did so. So he did so 25 years later in a work called Reading the Quran. So Koran o Yomu is a Japanese title, but this is a book that he made his idea come true to make the Quran more interesting, and Japanese audience, Japanese readers can read it with empathy. So let me now talk about this work published in 1983. And this is a book made up of a script of a series of lectures given at Iwanami Civic Seminar, like a seminars during 1982. And expressions in the lectures such as, "we who are not Muslims," suggest that the audience was assumed to be the non-Muslim public, as I mentioned earlier, that Japan is a country which has a little population of Muslims, so usually the audience should be non-Muslim public. And for them, Izutsu positions the Quran as one of the classics and carefully discusses how it can and should be read by modern Japanese general readers. So here again, Izutsu emphasizes that for Muslims, the Quran is an absolutely sacred book, a holy book that records only the words of God, unchanged and intact. So this is his words. So he repeatedly reminds the readers or audience that Quran is a sacred holy book for Muslims. And also he reminds the audience that the Muslims have different understandings and controversies over how to read and understand it. And regarding the difficulty of readings and understanding for non-Muslim readers, Izutsu wrote, "The Quran is an ancient book written in the distant Arabia. There is a great distance between us and it. The first distance is a temporal distance. The second is spatial distance. Today, the context of life are very different. The world in which we live is different from the world of the Arabs at the time the Quran was revealed. The Quran, as a linguistic text written in the Arabian desert in the 7th century, cannot be read and understood naturally by us, the Japanese of today. Here, drawing on the concept of Lebenswelt, life world of the Austrian-German philosopher Edmund Husserl, Izutsu pointed to the existence of a spatial and temporal alienation between the Quran and the contemporary Japanese leaders, and emphasizes that this linguistic text must be read beyond this alienation. He goes on to point out that this is a record of a revelation, and revelation is based on the certain kind of speech act, that is parole. Although at first glance it appears to be special thought, but this is a speech act. Moreover, it is raised to the dimension of written language, écriture, when recorded. The scriptures we encounter are in that stage, that is écriture stage. What exists in written language that is detached from the context in which the original speech act occurred. So therefore, everyone is free to interpret it as they wish. Izutsu says, here is its word, people not present in the situation of the first utterance, no matter how distant they are in time and space, are free to interpret. The freedom of interpretation exists. Even those who live in the 20th century Japan are free to interpret the Quran. This is a privilege of words that have entered the dimension of écriture. Is it referred to the discussion of the German philosopher Hans-Georg Gadamer on the creativity of interpretation and how it expands horizons, and notes that Islamic culture has grown on the basis of such creativity of interpretation. However, the reading that is proposed to reader is not an interpretation, based on the experience of modern Japan, modern Japanese, but in the opposite direction. That is, first, the text of the Quran, which is given in the dimension of equity, should be brought back to the dimension of parole. In other words, the written word should return to the dense situationality of the spoken, should go to explore the unconscious semantic connection that enable parole, the fluid semantic energy beneath the words, or a kind of sense of being, or a primal image of the world that does not express itself directly, but indirectly and powerfully. So he eloquently discussed how they can go back to the parole position. And in doing so, the leaders can capture a worldview unique to the Quran and the Quranic sense of existence. So in reading the Quran, this book, which is over 450 pages long, it explains how to put the above method into practice by taking Al-Fatiha, the first chapter of the Quran. So within the 450 pages long book, he only talks about Al-Fatiha from the first ayah to the seventh. So, and for example, he devotes pages to the basmala at the beginning of the chapter, talking about sensation that would be obtained by chanting God's name, the image that the word Allah evokes, and the different faces that he has, and then explains the two words of Rahman and Rahim in the following manner. Mercy expressed in the disposition called Rahman is gratuitous mercy. It is not that God is merciful to us because we have done something good or because we are in a miserable state. Without discrimination or motivation, God extends mercy to all things. This is Rahman. This can be likened to the Buddhist compassion of the Bodhisattva. And in contrast, the compassion that works in Rahim is not gratuitous, but a mercy given in response to something on the part of the person that deserves mercy. This can be thought of as a linear mercy that deepens vertically, as opposed to the first type of mercy, which is horizontal and eternal. So considering the text of the Quran as words spoken between God and the Prophet, it explains the unique Arabic meanings of these words, trying to elicit the reader's understanding by presenting image and diagram, including examples from Buddhism that can be conveyed to Japanese audience, while cautioning that there is a wide gap between the meaning evoked by the Arabic words and the meaning evoked by the words in the Japanese translation. So this explanation has a very detailed. Sometimes he likened some terms to Japanese term or like a Buddhism jargon, but sometimes he cautions that these are totally different, something like that. So it shows that leaders have to lead the thoughts, feelings, image, sense of existence, and the worldview expressed through each words, and the worldview expressed behind each words of the Quran. He hoped that the explanation would invite the Japanese leaders to obtain a deeper understanding of the Quran and Islam, while simultaneously conveying the difficulty and the fascination of reading a text. So, while positioning the Quran as a classic is to try to show the audience or the readers how to read a text. So he is a linguist. And this is the last point. Izutsu repeatedly drew on the words of Thomas Carlyle. As a junior high school student, he was fascinated by Carlyle's own heroes and hero worship, which portrays Muhammad as the great hero of Arabia. And Izutsu remembered the author's comments in the book, in which Carlyle expressed his disenchantment with the Quran. With he wrote that he found Quran extremely boring. And at the end of the book, reading the Quran, Izutsu explains that this is because Carlyle simply did not have the reading skill to read the Quran in a living way and to understand it in a living manner. He noted that the technique is not something ready-made, but something that readers must think about and create for themselves as they read the Quran. And these words suggest that Izutsu believed that the methodology that he presented in the book and reading the Quran was not the only one available to Japanese readers. So he invited audience to think about the methodology of reading the Quran. So he didn't, push them how to read the Quran, but he showed one of the ways to read the Quran. So I'm at the conclusion. And in this presentation, I try to describe how a non-Muslim Japanese scholar, Toshihiko Izutsu, tried to find ways to read the Quran with empathy and objectivity. While acknowledging that the written language of the Quran can be understood differently by different readers, Izutsu invited Japanese reader to go back to the original conversation between Allah and the Prophet in order to capture a worldview unique to the Quran. Although his method has become familiar to some readers, maybe some of the readers could find it useful, but many others are still unaware of the philosophy behind his translation. That is, they don't know about it. They didn't, if they didn't read reading the Quran properly, they cannot get it. And simply, they take his translation, Quran translation, literally. And because Izutsu's efforts were direct toward describing the moment of revelation, his interpretation and the expression in it are more or less archaic, outdated, and in some cases do not fit modern sensibility. And this last point was explained in my previous talk. I explained it in my previous talk about it, how Izutsu's translation can make a misunderstanding of the Japanese people on Islam, because it's quite how to say classic, or how to say conservative, too conservative sometimes. So so I hope that I could give you some idea about its contribution to the readers of the translation of the Quran in Japan. So thank you very much for your attention, and that is all I have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Emi. It was really fascinating, very interesting, and very, I think, important for kind of global Quran, because the personality of Toshihiko Izutsu is indeed became really global in Islamic studies, and he is one of the most influential figure of modern Islamic studies. So I'm actually very